Hello guys. So in the previous videos we discussed about the anterior cranial fossa. Now we shall be mainly focusing on the middle cranial fossa. Okay. So before we discuss about the middle cranial fossa, the first important thing you have to understand over here is that, let us say, for example, I'll show you the middle cranial fossa from the top as well as from the lateral view also. Okay. So this is the lateral view which I am drawing right now. Right. So in this lateral view basically, where is this middle cranial fossa? Right. So all of you look here. This cranial fossa over here is called as your anterior cranial fossa. Here you have got middle cranial fossa, and this is posterior cranial fossa. Posterior cranial fossa has got a very large opening. This opening is called as foramen magnum. So this entirely is your skull vault. Okay. So this is the place where your brain is located in this way. Okay. Now down here you have got what? Down here you have got midbrain. After the midbrain you have got what? You have got pons, and after the pons you have got this particular part called as medulla oblongata, which is continuing down as your spinal cord. Okay. Now exactly what we'll do is that we shall make a section like this and we shall look from the top. Okay. Not in that way exactly, we will make a section in this way and look from the top. What are, we can see at the superior cranial fossa, we can see the middle cranial fossa, we can see the posterior cranial fossa also. Okay. So in that section over here, if you see, right, let us say that this is the nasal region. Okay. And here on both the sides you have got your ears. You have got your ears all the way. Now in this part you understood one thing in this part, and this is the hair on the back, let us say. Now in this part you understood one thing, that this is the frontal region, this is the occipital region, and this part is your temporal region on both the sides. Okay, temporal region, frontal pole, occipital pole, and the temporal region. Now here I have to divide into three cranial fossas. For example, let us say, see here, so this is one line which I am drawing right now. Right, and next this is another line which I am drawing right now. Now here you can see three important cranial fossas, right? So what are the three important cranial fossa? This is called as your anterior cranial fossa, and this one over here is called as your middle cranial fossa, and this is called as your posterior cranial fossa. Now in this posterior cranial fossa itself you have got this opening, and this is called as your foramen magnum. So this part in the middle posterior cranial fossa is called as your foramen magnum. Now what are the different structures you can see over here? You can see that this part which I am highlighting right now, see this entire part which I am highlighting right now is nothing but called as your sphenoid bone. Okay, you see this entire part is nothing but called as your sphenoid bone. Now where is this pituitary gland located? Pituitary gland is located in the center of your sphenoid bone. So this is your middle cranial fossa. Now in this middle cranial fossa, if I ask you what are the borders, what will you tell me? See, the first important thing you have to tell me over here is that, see, this is lateral and this is also lateral. Okay, down here these two are also lateral. Okay, and you see this center part over here, this is called as the medial part. So if I divide this entirely into two halves, this will be the anterior, this will be the posterior. Yes or no? One is called as anterior, one is called as posterior. So can I tell this one as anteromedial or anteriorly and medially? What is the structure I have got? This is one pillar like structure I have located, that is located in the center line, right, in the midline. So that is why this is called as anteriorly and medially. Okay. Now anteriorly and laterally, anterior and lateral border, these are the two borders which are also called as anterior and lateral borders. If you come on to the back, on the back side, posteriorly and medially, this is the border I have got. Posteriorly and laterally, these are the two borders I have got. Okay. So let us look at the same picture over here. Okay. You see the same picture over here. See this part which I have just now discussed is anterior as well as medial, and these two on either sides is called as anterior and lateral. Here this one is called as posterior medial and these two are called as posterior lateral. So how many borders for the middle cranial fossa we have got? We have got 4 borders. Anteriorly and medially we have got one border. Anteriorly, laterally we have got the borders. Posterior medially and posterolaterally also we have got the borders. Okay. So let us write down all these borders one by one. First important thing, we shall go on with this anterior medial border. So this anterior medial border, anteriorly and medially, what do I have? What is this structure called as? This structure is called as limbus of the sphenoid bone. This is called as limbus of your sphenoid bone. After that I will show you the real skull also. So this is called as the limbus of the sphenoid bone. And okay, what is that? What is that limbus of the sphenoid bone? See this part. This part is called as the limbus of the sphenoid bone. Next, you even have got 2 parts, one blue line on the right, one blue line on the left, right? So what are these two called as? This is anteromedial or anterolateral. This is anteriorly and laterally located. Anteriorly and laterally. So anteriorly and laterally, what do we have? What is this structure called as? These two structures which are wing-like things, these are called as lesser wings of sphenoid. So if these are lesser wings of sphenoid, then there should be greater wings of sphenoid. Where are these greater wings of sphenoid? See, this part you see, this wing over here, okay, and you can also see this entire wing like this. This entire wing is called as a greater wing of the sphenoid, and the rest is called as the lesser wing of the sphenoid. Now here what is the structure you have got? Anteriorly and laterally, I have got lesser wings of sphenoid. Lesser wings of sphenoid. One we have got is a greater wings of sphenoid, another one we have got is a lesser wings of sphenoid. So anteriorly and laterally we have got the lesser wings of sphenoid. Now after that, what is this one over here? This border which I am drawing right now is posteriorly medially or posteriorly laterally. So this one is posteriorly and laterally located. So this one over here is posteriorly and laterally located. So posteriorly and laterally, what is the thing you have got? You have got the superior surface, superior part of the petrous part of the temporal bone. Now, no need not to confuse here. I'll tell you this thing, right? So if you look at this, right? If you look at this structure over here in this sphenoid bone over here, right? So let us say that this part itself is your sphenoid bone. Which is in the form of a butterfly. Okay, so this part is only your sphenoid bone. So this part solely is called as your sphenoid bone. Okay, now after this sphenoid bone, the part which is on the back of that is called as a temporal bone. Okay, see this part which I am highlighting with the blue, this is called as your temporal bone. Now in this temporal bone, there are 2 important parts. Okay, I mean in this view from the top, you can see only 2 important parts. What are these 2 important parts? You see this part over here and this part on the other side, right? So this part which you can see over here is called as a squamous part of the temporal bone. Okay, after that you can see this particular part over here and this particular part over here. These 2 parts over here are called as a petrous part of the temporal bone. So there are 2 parts of the temporal bone which we have got. So this part over here is called as, see this part over here is called as your squamous part of the temporal bone, and this one over here is called as your petrous part of the temporal bone. Petrous part of your temporal bone. Okay, now just look at this. Where is your squamous and where is your temporal part? Just focus on this. See, this part which I am showing it to you right now is called as a squamous part of the temporal bone. Okay, and after that you see this part over here like this part over here is called as a petrous part of the temporal bone. Now you tell me, this line wherever I have drawn, this I have drawn in the petrous part or I have drawn in the squamous part? I have drawn in the petrous part. So what you need to write, posterior and laterally what do you have? You have posterior and lateral border is present on the superior part of the petrous part of the temporal bone. Superior part of the petrous part of your temporal bone. So it is present on the superior part of the petrous part of your temporal bone. Clear? Next important thing, if you look carefully here, this structure which I am drawing with the green is called as posteromedial border, right? So this particular posteromedial border, what does this posteromedial border as the other name? Okay, just write it down. So this is located posteriorly and medially. So what is the structure which is located posteriorly and medially? This is called as dorsum sellae of the sphenoid bone. What is this called? Dorsum sellae of the sphenoid bone. So this is called as a dorsum sellae of sphenoid bone. Dorsum sellae of the sphenoid bone. So overall, let us just revise this fastly. We have discussed over here 4 important borders. So anteriorly and medially, what do we have? We have got this pink color part called as the limbus of the sphenoid bone. Next important thing, anteriorly and laterally, what do we have? Anteriorly and laterally I have got this structure, and this structure over here is called as a lesser wing of the sphenoid. Okay, just beneath that lesser wing, that wing is called as a greater wing of the sphenoid, the remaining that yellow color portion. Next, posteriorly what do you have? Posteriorly and laterally, yeah, posteriorly and laterally what do you have? Posteriorly and laterally you have got a structure over here. This is called as the superior part of the petrous part, not the squamous part. Where is the squamous part? See, this part over here is called as your squamous part. See, this part is called as your squamous part. Okay, and this part over here is called as your petrous part. So where is it located? It is located in the superior part of the petrous part of your temporal bone. Next, on the back side, whatever you have here, this is called as a dorsum sellae of the sphenoid. So in this picture also, you see this part over here, right? So this part over here is called as your dorsum sellae of the sphenoid bone. Okay, so these are the borders first which we have to discuss. Now once the borders are done, let us discuss what are the bones that are present in the middle cranial fossa. What are the bones here? Just look here and tell. I can actually see only 2 colors, right? What are those 2 colors? I can see yellow, I can see red. Okay, what is this yellow color called as? This yellow color is nothing but your sphenoid bone. What is this red color called as? This red color is nothing but called as your temporal bone. And within the temporal bone, you have got 2 parts here. One is called as a squamous part and the one is called as a petrous part. See here, this one is called as your, this one over here is called as your squamous part of the temporal bone. So this one is called as your petrous part of the temporal bone. Squamous part as well as the petrous part. So the floor is consisting of floor of middle cranial fossa. Floor of middle cranial fossa is consisting of mainly 2 bones. So one is called as a sphenoid bone. Now if I tell sphenoid bone, tell me, is the entire sphenoid? See this entire yellow color part which you can see like this, right? This entire yellow color part is called as your sphenoid. Now tell me, is this entire yellow color part involved here? No, only this part of the yellow color one is involved. You see, only this part is involved in the middle cranial fossa. What is this part called as? This part which I have highlighted over here is called as a greater wing. Okay, then just above the greater wing, those blue color lines you see like this, right? These blue color lines constitutes the lesser wing. So that is what I was telling you. Beneath the lesser wing, you have got what? Greater wings. So if I ask you to tell what is the floor of the middle cranial fossa consisting, will you tell me lesser wings or will you tell me the greater wings? Obviously, these are the greater wings. Okay, so this part over here is called as a greater wing. greater wings of your sphenoid bone, right? So floor is consisting of two important things. One is called as the greater wings of sphenoid bone. One is called as the greater wings of the sphenoid bone, and the second one is called as the squamous and petrous part. Squamous and petrous part of the temporal bone. Petrous part of your temporal bone. Okay. So what is the other one? That is called as the squamous as well as the petrous part of your temporal bone. Right. Now what we have to discuss is that as we were discussing the middle cranial fossa, there is one very important structure that is located exactly in the center part of the middle cranial fossa. See, this part is called as the center part of the middle cranial fossa. So what we'll do is that we'll just remove this sphenoid bone separately and study what are the structures that are located exactly in the center. So if I have removed the sphenoid bone from the rest, you see this part is called as the center part of your middle cranial fossa. In the center part also nothing has been changed, the same things. What are the same things here? See, this part over here which is on the back, right? So what was the thing which is on the back which you called it as? You called it as dorsum sellae of your sphenoid bone. So here also the same thing. This part over here is called as your dorsum sellae of your sphenoid bone. This entire bone over here is your sphenoid bone. Sphenoid bone. So this is called as your dorsum sellae of your sphenoid bone. After this dorsum sellae of your sphenoid bone, if you look in the center, over here, two important things you can very clearly see, guys. What are those two important things? See here. This is one important thing, and this is one important thing, right? So this is called as the center of the sphenoid bone. You see, this part is called as the center of the sphenoid bone. Now in this part, two important things you can see. See, this part which I am highlighting right now is called as clinoid process. What is this clinoid process called as? This is called as anterior clinoid process. Anterior clinoid process, and you even have got posterior clinoid process. So there are two clinoid processes. One is called as anterior clinoid and posterior clinoid. So where are these anterior and posterior clinoid? See here. This clinoid process which you can see over here is called as your anterior clinoid process. Next, you see this clinoid process on the back. Let me change the color. See, this clinoid process which you can see on the back, this is called as posterior clinoid process. So overall, how many clinoid processes you can see? One is the anterior clinoid process which I am drawing with the red, and next with the blue, whatever I am highlighting is the posterior clinoid process. Okay, so these two important things over here. See, this one is your anterior clinoid process and this blue one is your posterior clinoid process. Now, in between both the clinoid process, you see a concavity there. You see a fossa like thing over here, exactly here, right? So this fossa or concavity, whatever you can see here, is called as hypophyseal fossa. This fossa is called as hypophyseal fossa. So exactly in this hypophyseal fossa, what is sitting inside? There is pituitary gland that is sitting inside this hypophyseal fossa. Above this hypophyseal fossa, you see this part. See, this part which I am highlighting right now, above this hypophyseal fossa, this part over here is called as tuberculum sellae. Okay, this part over here is called as tuberculum sellae. Okay. Now, if I ask you this thing, that surrounding the hypophyseal fossa, what are the structures that are present? Anterior to hypophyseal fossa, right? Or I can also call it as anterior wall of hypophyseal fossa is formed by tuberculum sellae. If I ask posterior wall of hypophyseal fossa is formed by, can I tell it as dorsum sellae? Posterior wall is formed by dorsum sellae. And on either sides of this hypophyseal fossa, what are there? In the front we have got anterior clinoid process, on the back side, on the either side we have got the posterior clinoid process. So there are four structures over here. Anteriorly, anterior wall, or anteriorly, anterior wall. Anterior wall is formed by tuberculum sellae. Next, posterior wall of hypophyseal fossa is formed by your dorsum sellae. Next, Anteriorly on both the sides you have got these two horn projections, horny like projections. These horn like projections are called as anterior clinoid process, and same things on the back side you have got, these are called as your posterior clinoid process. So these are the structures which you can see over this sphenoid bone. Sir, where is greater wing and lesser wing over here? See, this is your, see this wing which I am drawing with the black, right? This wing which I am drawing with the black is called as your lesser wing. And where is greater wing? See, this lines which I am putting right now is called as your greater wing of your sphenoid bone. Clear? One is called as your lesser wing, another one is called as your greater wing of your sphenoid bone. Clear all of you? Now, next important thing over here is that, next important thing, you need to know one very important thing. What is that? See, basically, when you look, if this is your brain, see this is your brain. It has got right cerebral hemisphere, left cerebral hemisphere, right? This is the top surface or also called as the superior lateral surface of the brain. Okay, now this part which you are looking from the down, this is called as the inferior surface. For example, this is the brain over here, right? Now what I am doing, I am removing the brain. If I am removing the brain, if I have to show you the lower surface of the brain, what will I do? If I have to show you this one, I have to raise the brain like this, right? So that is what I am doing now. So when you raise the brain, in the inferior surface, you have got something called as optic chiasma. All of you know that, right? You see, there is some structure like this. This structure is called as optic chiasma. Just behind this optic chiasma, you have got another structure like this. This structure over here is called as tuber cinereum. Okay, I will write down this in a minute, but now just listen. Blue one is called as optic chiasma. Behind optic chiasma, this is called tuber cinereum. What is happening? The tuber cinereum over here is together forming a conical projection, right? This conical projection which is formed by this tuber cinereum is called as medial eminence. Now from this medial eminence, you see a structure that is hanging down, right? You see a structure that is hanging down and ending up in this way. You know what is this structure which is hanging down? This is called as pituitary stalk or infundibulum. Okay, so this one over here was called as your optic chiasma, and this one over here is called as your tuber cinereum. And what is happening with the tuber cinereum? Tuber cinereum is in continuous with another structure called as infundibulum or pituitary stalk. Pituitary stalk, or you can also call it as infundibulum. Okay, and infundibulum or pituitary stalk is again continuous with another structure. This one over here is called as pars nervosa. Pars nervosa. What is the other name for pars nervosa? It is called as neurohypophysis. Neurohypophysis. What is the other name for neurohypophysis? Posterior pituitary. Posterior pituitary. Then where is the anterior pituitary? So this is your anterior pituitary over here. You see, anterior pituitary has no connection with the pituitary stalk. Okay, so this is your anterior pituitary. So whatever it is, posterior pituitary or anterior pituitary, both of them together you call it as a pituitary gland. Where are they lying? They are lying inside a tunnel like thing in this way, right? So this structure over here is nothing but called as your sella turcica of your sphenoid bone. So this cavity which you can see here, this is called sella turcica. Where is this cavity over here? This hypophyseal fossa is nothing but here called as your sella turcica. Exactly in the center here you have got your pituitary gland. Okay, so here only you have got pituitary gland. Now if you look at the real picture over here, right? Now in this real picture over here, you can see this structure like this. You see there is a cavity here in this way. Within this cavity, you see within this cavity that your pituitary gland is residing inside like this. You see, if I am zooming it out, so this cavity, again I am rubbing it out, just look at this. Once again I will draw this cavity. You see this? You see this cavity over here? This cavity is nothing but called as your sella turcica of sphenoid bone. Within this sella turcica of your sphenoid bone, you see first pars nervosa over here. Just attached to this pars nervosa, you see another structure called as your anterior pituitary gland. So if you look at the same picture over here, You see here, this is the thing, sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. Okay, so this is your sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. Now, next important thing over here is that in this particular picture, this is your middle cranial fossa. In this middle cranial fossa, one very important thing I have to discuss is that, can you see some holes within this middle cranial? I'll show you a better picture. If you can see over here, yeah, within this middle cranial fossa, you can see some multiple holes here, right? So these multiple holes are nothing but called as your foramen. So let us now see what are the different kinds of foramens that are present here. When we were discussing anterior cranial fossa, we discussed some foramens. We discussed foramens that are present on the cribriform plate, right? These are called as multiple foramina of the cribriform plate. We even discussed in the front we have got anterior ethmoidal foramen, posterior ethmoidal foramen. We also discussed what structures are coming out of these foramens, right? Through some small multiple foramens, from there olfactory nerves will come out, and anterior ethmoidal foramen, anterior ethmoidal artery, nerve and vein, posterior ethmoidal foramen, from there posterior ethmoidal artery, vein and nerve are coming out. Now in the middle cranial fossa, we have got quite many openings here, quite many foramina. Let us one by one see what are the names of this foramina and what structures that are coming out of this foramina. Okay. So first important thing is that you see this foramina over here, this particular foramina over here. This particular foramina over here is called as superior orbital fissure. Superior orbital fissure. Okay. Now, through this superior orbital fissure, what are the different cranial nerves that are coming inside? One is cranial nerve number 3, cranial nerve number 4, cranial number 5, cranial nerve number 6. 3, 4, 5 and 6. So, what are the cranial nerves? Cranial nerve number 3 is coming out, cranial nerve number 4, cranial nerve number 5. Within the fifth pair of cranial nerve, there are 3 more nerves. Okay, so let me write it like this completely so that it would be very clear for you. So, through this superior orbital fissure, what are the cranial nerves that are coming? Third pair of cranial nerve. What is third pair of cranial nerve called as? Oculomotor nerve. Olfactory optic oculomotor nerve. Oculomotor nerve. After the third, next we have got the fourth pair of cranial nerve, which is called as trochlear nerve. Trochlear nerve. After that, we have got the fifth pair of cranial nerve. Within this fifth pair of cranial nerve, we have got 3. V1, V2, V3. V1 is called as ophthalmic branch, V2 is called as maxillary branch, and V3 is called as mandibular branch. So here, which one is coming out? That is your ophthalmic branch. Ophthalmic branch of fifth pair of cranial nerve. Fifth pair of cranial nerve is called as your trigeminal nerve. So the other name for this is your trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal. So I hope now you understood why it is called as trigeminal, because there are 3 branches: ophthalmic branch, which is considered as V1, maxillary branch, which is considered as V2, and mandibular branch, which is considered as V3. So which branch is coming out of this opening? That is ophthalmic branch. Next is sixth pair of cranial nerve. Sixth pair of cranial nerve, which is also called as abducens nerve. Abducens nerve. So, oculomotor, trochlear, ophthalmic branch of trigeminal nerve, as well as abducens nerve. So, all these are the cranial nerves which are basically emerging from which fissure? That is your superior orbital fissure. Now, after this superior orbital fissure, if you can very clearly see, there is one more fissure. Okay, see, there is a small opening which is round, perfectly round here, right? I'm zooming it in. You can see a small round opening. So, this small round opening, anything which is round is called rotundum. Okay, so this is called as foramen rotundum. This is called as foramen rotundum. Now, through this foramen rotundum, what is coming out? See, through this foramen rotundum, again the fifth pair of cranial nerve, that is your trigeminal nerve, is coming. Trigeminal nerve. Now, in this trigeminal nerve, 3 branches I told you. One branch already is done. Ophthalmic. What is the second branch? V2. What is V2 called as? Maxillary branch. So, from here, V2, that is maxillary branch, is coming out. Maxillary branch of your trigeminal nerve is coming. Next, inferiorly and laterally. Inferiorly and laterally. Why are you telling it as inferiorly and laterally? See, this is foramen rotundum. Inferior to this foramen rotundum and little bit laterally. Down outwards. Inferiorly, laterally. You see, you have got one more foramen over here. Right? Now tell me the shape of this foramen. Don't you think this foramen is oval shape? So can I call it as foramen ovale? This particular foramen is called as foramen ovale. From foramen ovale, what is the nerve that is coming out? Again the same, that is a fifth pair of cranial nerve, trigeminal, but this time you know the answer now, which nerve should come out of this. V1 is already done, V2 is already done, now leftover one is V3, that is your mandibular branch. Mandibular branch is coming out of this. Next, after that, you can see one small tiny hole, right? Small tiny pinhole here. Can you look at this? You see a small tiny pinhole here as well as here also. This small tiny pinhole like structure which you can see over here is what is called as foramen spinosum. Foramen spinosum. Now, through this foramen spinosum, what are the structures that are coming out? The first important structure is middle meningeal artery. The first important structure is middle meningeal artery that is coming out. Second important structure is, if artery is there, along with the artery, vein also will be. So, middle meningeal vein. Middle meningeal vein. And third important thing is meningeal branch of V3. Third important thing is, I will explain this. What is this? Meningeal branch of V3. Meningeal branch of V3. What is V3? V3 is your mandibular branch, right? So, for example, let us say this is your trigeminal nerve. This trigeminal nerve is giving three branches: ophthalmic branch, maxillary branch, and mandibular branch. Now, each branch will have again some small branches. Yes or no? So, the V3 component is mandibular nerve, mandibular branch. This mandibular branch is also having one more branch, and that branch is called as meningeal branch. Okay, so meningeal branch of V3, and this comes out of foramen spinosum. And final important thing is that you see this particular foramen here, right? You see this foramen, this one and this one. Now tell me, is this foramen having any perfect shape? There is no perfect shape. Can I tell what is the name of this foramen? For example, let us say that someone has taken a blunt object, and he made a cut on your hand. Now, with the help of the blunt object, if he is making any kind of perforation, any kind of injury to your hand, right, will that cut incision be even, or will that cut incision be lacerated? Yes, so it will be unevenly lacerated. Yes or no? Right. So, this particular part which you can see over here is nothing but called as your foramen lacerum. As if someone has lacerated, you see that uneven edges. So, that is how this foramen is looking. So, you call it as foramen lacerum. Foramen lacerum, right? So, what are the foramens we have discussed so far? We have discussed something called as your superior orbital fissure. We have discussed foramen rotundum. We have discussed foramen ovale. Rotundum is round, ovale is oval shaped. Small tiny pinhole like thing is called as foramen spinosum, and lacerated edges is foramen lacerum. Next, apart from this, there are two more foramens which I cannot draw it here, show it to you here. I will show it in another picture over here. Now here, we are done with almost all of them. There are just two more that are left. Now, if I am zooming the picture in, can you see this small opening over here? You cannot see the opening actually, right? But in fact, there is an opening here. This particular opening over here is nothing but called as hiatus of greater petrosal nerve. This is called as hiatus of greater petrosal nerve. So, this particular one is called as your hiatus of greater petrosal nerve. Now, when I tell hiatus of greater petrosal nerve, there will also be hiatus of lesser petrosal nerve. Actually, in this picture, you cannot see where is the hiatus of lesser petrosal nerve, but in fact, just write it down, as there is one more thing called as hiatus of lesser petrosal nerve. The name itself tells that if there is a hiatus of greater petrosal nerve, what is the name of the branch here? The name of the branch is greater petrosal nerve. The name of the branch is your greater petrosal nerve. From where is this greater petrosal nerve coming? This greater petrosal nerve is a branch of facial nerve. This one is a branch of facial nerve. Okay, in the same way you have got another one called as hiatus of lesser petrosal nerve, right? So what is the name of this branch? Again, if this is greater petrosal nerve, then this one will be called as lesser petrosal nerve. Lesser petrosal nerve. Now if greater petrosal nerve is a branch of facial nerve, then this lesser petrosal nerve is a branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. Branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, so two important things we have covered over here. One is called as hiatus of greater petrosal nerve, hiatus of lesser petrosal nerve. The name itself tells greater petrosal is greater petrosal nerve, branch of facial, lesser is a branch of glossopharyngeal. So don't confuse here, this is very important. Okay, right. Next important thing is that you can see a canal like thing over here. You see this part, this particular part over here, you can very clearly see a canal like thing, right? So this canal like thing over here is called as carotid canal. So this one over here is called as your carotid canal. So let us see what are the structures that are passing through this carotid canal, right? So one is, why it is called as carotid canal? Because there is an artery called as internal carotid artery which enters into the cranial cavity through this foramen. Okay, one is called as internal carotid artery. After the internal carotid artery, the second one is deep petrosal nerve. So how many petrosal nerves we have got over here? One we got is a greater petrosal nerve, another one is a lesser petrosal nerve, and the third one over here is called as your deep petrosal nerve. Okay, so this is your deep petrosal nerve. Now, let us just revise the things which we have just discussed here, guys. So we started our discussion with the middle cranial fossa, right? So we started our discussion with the topic that is middle Now within this middle cranial fossa, you have got many important structures over here. So these highlighted structures over here, the green lining which I have done here, this is called as your sphenoid bone. So this entire bone over here is called as your sphenoid bone. Now out of this sphenoid bone, the next important thing over here is, down here you have got the temporal bone, two parts of the temporal bone. This is called as the squamous part and this is called as a petrous part of the temporal bone. Okay. Next over here is that if you look at this, there are four borders. Anteriorly and medially, what is this thing you have got? This is called as a limbus of the sphenoid. Okay, limbus of sphenoid. Posterior medially, what do you have? You have got the dorsum sellae of the sphenoid. Next, anteriorly and laterally, what do you have? You have got the lesser wings of the sphenoid. And beneath the lesser wings, you see what are these wings over which I am highlighting right now on both the sides like this. These wings which you can see over here are called as your greater wings. Okay, let us not discuss about greater wings now. So anteriorly and laterally you have got the lesser wings of sphenoid. Posteriorly, laterally you have got the superior part of the petrous part of the temporal bone. Next, within this temporal bone you have got two parts. One is called as squamous and petrous, which you can see from this picture. Okay. Next, floor is consisting of how many bones? This yellow color one is called as a sphenoid bone. Specifically speaking, greater wing of sphenoid or lesser wing? Greater wing of sphenoid. Next, this red color one is called as your temporal bone. Okay, so this red color one, together you call it as a temporal bone. So temporal bone has got two parts, squamous and petrous. Squamous and petrous part of the temporal bone. Okay, so these are the two structures that form the middle cranial fossa floor. Next, if I remove only the sphenoid bone over here, it has got different parts. See, this particular part which you can see over here, this is called as tuberculum sellae, which forms the anterior wall. Okay. Next, this part which you can see here is called as what? The dorsum sellae, which forms the posterior wall. On either side anteriorly we have got anterior clinoid process, you see, anterior clinoid process, and back side here we have got posterior clinoid process. In the center, this particular structure which you can see is called as a hypophyseal fossa, where the pituitary gland is lodged. Okay. So this was the thing which I was explaining you over here. And regarding the foramens, very important thing, superior orbital foramen is the one which gives large number of branches, that is 3, 4, 5, 6. In 5, which one? V1, ophthalmic branch. The next one is foramen rotundum, which gives V2, foramen ovale, which gives V3, and foramen spinosum, it gives meningeal artery, middle meningeal vein, and meningeal branch of V3. Okay. So here and other foramens which you can see over here is hiatus of greater petrosal nerve, hiatus of lesser petrosal nerve. Obviously, through this hiatus, what will pass? Greater petrosal nerve, which is a branch of what? Facial nerve. Lesser petrosal nerve is a branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. And finally, we have got carotid canal, where internal carotid artery and deep petrosal nerve is passing. Okay. So this is little bit memory part. Obviously, you have to remember it. So it would be very easy from day one itself. If you keep on revising and reciting it, it would be very easy. So this is all you need to know about the middle cranial fossa, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video. Goodbye.